is that, but actually all of these books, your main character are strong women characters, which, and kudos, I thought they were really well done, well written, and I think, I don't know if it's more talked about than it's really a thing, but was there any pushback? Was there any thought when you went into these? Because I know your earlier books I think were male characters, but now these,
Yeah, it just got boring writing dudes. And I think that was something else is that, like I wrote 3 books that had male protagonists. And there was like the tough guy, the kid, and then more tough guys. It got kind of boring, but that's also what you see a lot in books. And so when I first wrote, and it's very nice you say that in American Elsewhere that that character worked well. I don't think that I pulled her off as well as I did like Shara and things like that. I think that, that's something that I see looking back, is that I think that the star of that book is really is the town of Wayne. And I look back and I'm like, I see ways that I could have made her more real. But that's enough crapping on myself in public. But like Shara was very much a choice because the way that I had the idea for this book, for Stairs, and for this whole world was I was cleaning my house, which is when I have my best ideas. And I was vacuuming, and I just read this book called Dark Star by Alan Furst, which is a story about a Soviet spy in the Second World War who was a Polish Jew. And it was really interesting because when you read spy novels in the Second World War, it's always like a handsome English guy, or a handsome American guy, or a handsome French dude. They're all from the West. So the reasoning for the East was very interesting. I'd never thought of that as much as I had the West. And and a lot of that book was about how in Poland and in that region, they were not prepared for like modern warfare. And a lot of their leadership style still felt almost like knights. And I was like, so that's interesting. You've got the modern crashing into the ancient in a horrible, horrible way. And I was like, interesting. And so I was cleaning my house, and we had on Turner Classic Movies. And the movie that was playing in the background was Prisoner of Zinda, which is sort of a light 1930s story about an Englishman who goes to a fictional Eastern European nation, finds he looks a lot like the king of this tiny nation, and then hijinks ensue. And I remember watching it, and it's all these, proud old men in their big castles with all these furs and medals and like the epaulets and things like that. And I remember thinking, it must really suck to be a diplomat to these tiny nations and have to talk to all these people, these ancient weird rules. There's all these countries and there's all these old customs. It must be really hard. And I was like, it's interesting. Let's think about that. So I did. And so I said, all right, so got a diplomat. Go into these tiny nations in Eastern Europe with all these old rules. So we can't have them like that ambassador because that makes for a crappy story. So it needs to be someone who clashes a lot with that culture. It's very macho, very masculine. These dudes basically shoot deer all day and drink ale and things like that. I don't know if they do. So I was like, who would clash a lot with that culture? And I was like, what about a Southeast Asian woman who's highly educated and is not combative, not someone who shoots guns? And I said, okay, that's interesting. And so I started thinking of her as sort of a female George Smiley from the Tinker Tailor books. I don't know if you read those, but he was built to be sort of the anti-James Bond. And that, instead of being a hot dude who rides around all day, he's nailing ladies and shooting guns, he's an old fat man who reads a lot of books, and his wife's cheating on him, and is way better at the administrative side of spying, which is where it actually all happened.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I was thinking about her from that perspective. And I said, okay, but they can't just like her because she's a smart lady. Like, that's not a good story either. I mean, that's the world. We don't want to read about the world. We want to read about something interesting and new. So I said, okay, so why do they hate her and her people? And then my brain said, well, it's because they killed all their guys. And that was that. And so I did sort of choose that aspect, and that, in the novels, like you got the continent, which has these old dead gods, and then there's Sapur, which feels like India, which is way more advanced and way more modern and way more cultured, and is not nearly as masculine, and so there's a lot of reasons for the continent not to like them. So it really is a way to look at the ancient crashing into the modern in that perspective alone, in the term of just pure gender. So I forget what your question was. Does it answer it?
Well, that was good. Yeah, we were talking about just writing women characters.
Yeah, writing women characters, and if it was a choice. Yeah, and it was a choice.
Yeah.
And I remember that as I wrote Stairs, I knew at one point in time Shara was going to have to go and talk to a local, like, authority figure.
Yeah.
My idea was that it would be an old general who was like a fat old dude that she could dupe and kind of like she could trick him into doing the things that he wanted to do. He'd be an old blustery man. And I realized I'd already written that character in the book. He's like one of the first people in the book, and that happens already. And I was like, I don't want to do it again because that's a cute trick, but that's not a whole plot. I don't want to just have it keep happening again. I was like, so we need to make this character the local general, someone interesting and someone that can maybe sort of challenge her a little bit, or at least call her on her bullshit, or someone who's not that stupid. And I was like, why don't we make her like a 50-year-old lady? And I was like, huh. And that's how I wrote Shireen Mulligesh.
Mulligesh, yes.
And she becomes the protagonist of Blade.
She features in the second book. Yeah, so you've got the
Sharon, the first one, who is the spy, and then the second one is Mulligesh.
Yeah.
And that's how that happened. And we were chatting about this earlier. I had not intended to write a sequel for Stairs. It was I wrote the book, and I was like, that's good, cool, I'm going to move on now. And my editor was like, you should really think about this. I think people are going to want more of these. And I was like, tough shit. I don't want to do more. And then he was like, yeah, but you're going to really have to start to think about what kind of writer you want to be, because people are going to want this. There is a demand there. You might want to consider trying to meet that demand. And I was like, all right, fine, I'll think about it. And then, because what I was really concerned about was that at the end of Stairs, Shara's story is over. And from there on out, she's going to have problems. And those problems are mostly going to be because she takes charge in an office somewhere and is the boss of something important. And bosses' lives are not terribly interesting. There's a lot of meetings, a lot of desk work, there's a lot of talking to people. Like, no one writes a book about the police commissioner. They write about the detectives,
right,
and the sergeants, and maybe the lieutenants, but nobody talks about the commissioner, because he's the dude talking to all the city officials. And that's what Shara was going to be. And I was like, I don't know, that's what has to happen in this world. And I don't want to write that book. And so I was wondering what I could do. And then I remember, that's why, like I said, that bit about the police, is that in The Wire, they change main characters at one point in time for some seasons, where they're like, let's forget about those main guys and start looking at these other guys so they can look at this world from a different perspective. And so that's what I did. I realized that the next person who should be shoved out like into this world should be Mulligesh.
Yeah.
And I think it worked out. It looks like I meant to do it, but I really didn't mean to do it. I hope it looks like it.
It feels, of the two, I feel, and I think it's the bonus of writing good, fleshed out characters, that you have that
story.
You have that option, right? You can, because I was like, when I started this one, I was like, oh, this is Mulligesh's story, right?
Yeah.
And the next one is Sigurd, who's the big badass,
the big tough dude,
bodyguard essentially guy. And so in those three characters are right at the beginning, right at the top of the first book. And so you've got everything in your toolbox.
Yeah, that's something that I found that I like in my books, because I'm writing a new series now. I signed the contract, they don't pay me for it. So, but a thing that I've learned that I like to do is I like to write about like the gang. It's like so pretty much all my books are about like the gang solves a mystery. And it wasn't until I was about a third of the way in the Stairs I was like, I'm making a gang here, aren't I? And Shara and Sigurd and Mulagesh as they solve this big mystery. And I was like, I like this. They're all sitting around a room, kind of fighting with each other and chatting about what's going on. I liked that energy, and that sort of like energy spilled over into the next books. So I think they worked out.
Yeah.
Right? Maybe.
I think they did. Well, I don't know if does anyone have any questions, or I have more questions, but I don't want to. Let's see what our time. Okay.
When did City of Miracles come out?
May of 2017.
Can you tell us more about this new series you're working on? What the kind of setting?
Sure. It is set in an early Renaissance style second world. It's called Foundryside currently. And it is set in a city where they've learned how to inscribe characters on objects to make them change that object's reality, to make it think that it can act against physics in a certain way. And that's the most boring way to put this. But so, for example, they've written on like glass that says, all right, you're not actually glass, you're the moon. And when it's dark out, you're supposed to shine like the moon. And the glass says, all right, I forgot about that. And it's dark out, so now I'll shine like the moon. And so that's how they have lights, is that they've tricked this glass into acting like the moon. And once you start to read it, you realize that it's basically a method of computer programming. That you have to write these like characters in a certain way and make an argument that will make that object do what you want it to do. And the problem is that there's all these companies that have set up shop that basically have made a killing off this. As happens, there's been a lot of mergers and acquisitions until there's only 4 left. And they have started fighting like amongst themselves for a new sort of technology that has like the ability to turn off all these things that they've written. So their whole like civilization runs on this technology, but somebody has this thing where you can hit a button and it all stops, which has severe problems because, for example, they have like a house on supports, and they've written on the supports, you're not actually wood, you're stone. That's why you can sit in water for ages and ages and not rot. But then if you hit that switch, so it's like, wait a minute, I'm wood, I'm not stone, and I've been sitting in this water for a long time and I'm rotting all the way through. And then of course the house just collapses and kills everybody inside, which sucks. So it's kind of interesting because with these books, it's very much a spy novel dressed up like fantasy. And in these books, it's very much cyberpunk dressed up like fantasy. And that there's these big, and I draw from like the East India Company and things like that. These old like merchant houses that were first like set up to explore and go out and try and bring trade to these cities. And it stars a thief who has been scribed, because that's the word that they use for trying to enchant like these items, who has had her skull scribed, which is outlawed. You're not supposed to do that to human beings because it never ends well and it never works, and it's a horrible like abomination. But it worked for her. And the thing that she can do now is she can touch something like with her skin and she'll know, and all of that thing's like sensations will pour into her mind. So she can touch like a drawer and like know what's inside it. Or she can touch the floor and feel how many people are like around her like walking around. Or she can feel a wall and she'll know how to climb it, and she can feel locks and know how to pick it. Of course the problem is that if she does it too much, it causes horrible headaches and her nose starts to bleed and her eyes start to bleed, which sucks. But she happens to accidentally steal a piece of technology that's incredibly powerful. And of course this pisses off all the wrong people, and they try and hunt her down and find out what's going on.
Sounds awesome.
That's really good, yeah.
I gotta work on that pitch. I mean, I just signed the contract. You'd think I would know how to pitch it better, but yeah, that was like, what, 7 minutes of me talking?
Writing it and speaking it are different.
Yeah, writing and speaking
Yes.
it. Yeah, I was like, what is that thing about? Man, I hope I sold them the right thing.
I like the combination of fantasy with science fiction. You're talking about like body modification and
Right.
very contemporary things
Right.
in this sort of fantasy clothing.
Yeah, and there's and it's like it's fun because there's things in it because the way that these things work is basically like Wi-Fi. You have to have a big machine to like remember what all these like characters mean. It has to bear all the meaning, all the concentrated like meaning of these things. And then if you walk too far away from like these machines, your items forget what they are and they just stop working. But like for example, one thing that they have is like a carriage whose wheels have been scribed. And you can change like the controls and it says, and so then the wheels think, oh, I'm on a really steep hill. I need to start to roll forward because that's how gravity works. And you aren't on a big hill. It'll just start to roll forward. And then you can change it. Like, oh wait, now I'm actually slowing down a whole lot because the slopes changed. So they found a way to make cars without making an engine. And it touches on a lot of fun stuff because it gets into the Internet of Things. Because you start to realize that the way these things work is that they have minds of their own. They just think about what they're supposed to do and be all the time. And you start to realize the implications of a big company having all these things in your house and knowing a lot of stuff about you, as well as how they can be exploited, for example, shutting down the internet, which happened just recently. There's a lot of fun stuff in that you get to look at modern things from the point of view of like 15th century. I think it's Genoa is what it's most like, or Venice.
Oh, okay.
So it's a lot of fun.
Cool. Lots to look forward to. I think we're about quarter of.
Yeah.
Are we good? All right, well, thank you so much
Thank you.
for coming out.